All right. Hey there. Today we're going to be talking money market. It's one of the things that I had a request for in your survey that you did the other day. So it's what we're going to be talking about. Um, Remember that anytime you're dealing with a money market question, you want to be thinking actions of the Federal Reserve, right? That's really the biggest reason you're going to be looking at the money market. And if we are looking at the graph, and I want to make sure everything will show up on here as I do it, the bottom is just labeled quantity of money, nice and easy. And then the top axis is going to be your interest rate. And when you're dealing with the money market, you are dealing with your nominal interest rate. If you forget, then just leave it out and just write interest rate, right? Save yourself. You're not going to lose points for that. Usually, though, they will direct you in the question to the fact that it is a nominal interest rate that you are talking about. Now, when we're dealing with the money market, we really are just looking at the supply and demand for money. And it's pretty straightforward in the grand scheme of things. Like, literally, how much money do people need in order to buy all the things they want to buy? And how much money is the Federal Reserve willing to allow to exist in the economy? So we kind of go on this assumption, even though we know that the supply of money can change based on banking actions, but we sort of go on this that the money supply is going to be fixed because of the fact that the Fed is the one that really gets to control what happens to it. And don't forget to label both money supply, MS, at the top, and then quantity of money down at the bottom. Okay. So you want to be sort of labeling the graph, but then also labeling the quantity. It's just kind of weird because of the fact that when you have a perfectly inelastic curve, it is always the same quantity, right? That's sort of the whole point of it. But make sure you're labeling in both spots. And then you have a downward sloping money demand, which you can just label MD. And the whole idea here is that when interest rates are falling, people are willing to demand a greater quantity of money, which makes sense because cheaper interest rates makes it more affordable to buy a home, get a car, whatever it is that you're borrowing money to do. And so again, that quantity of money is fixed, but your interest rate is then determined by the equilibrium point, and then you illustrate the interest rate with a lowercase r. I don't know why, but go with it. Lowercase r sounds good. Now, more often than not, because you're going to be talking about the money market and how the Federal Reserve can alter the supply of money in order to fight a recession or inflation, more often than not, you're going to be focusing on recession because that's the more likely incident where the Fed will really need to step in. Okay. So if that's the case, in order to try and stimulate the economy, the Fed wants to lower interest rates. Well, the only way to really lower interest rates is by expanding the money supply. Okay. And they would choose to expand that money supply more often than not by buying bonds in order to pump money into the banks so that the banks can then lend that money out. And because you now have a lower interest rate, more people are more willing to take that money and then spend that money. Now, this is in many ways directly related to then aggregate demand, right? A lot of these graphs sort of interconnect to a certain extent because if now people are taking out more money, okay, and it's not necessarily just borrowing money, but it's also holding their own money, right? Which is why this is different than loanable funds, because you have to remember too that like people might have money that's saved, but they're willing to use their own money, not just take out a loan when interest rates are lower because it's not saving much in the bank. So they might as well just take it and spend it, kind of a thing. And so if that's the case and they're taking this money, whether it's borrowed or their own money, and they're spending it, then aggregate demand will shift to the right. And that can help to fix a recession sometimes. Okay. Now, obviously, the opposite would be true if we had an inflationary situation. We would be at a starting point over here with low interest rates and a larger money supply. And then they could try and restrict the amount of money in circulation by selling bonds, raising interest rates, raising that reserve requirement, and that could shift us back and create a higher reserve ratio. But you're much less likely to see that scenario than you are to see this scenario. Um, And when you're figuring out in a question which curve to shift, because you could very likely shift money demand instead of shifting money supply. So let me just grab a different color to make my life easier, right? So even if we had our initial money supply, well, that's a horrible marker. If the demand for money increases, let's say, I don't know, oh goodness, I don't know, there's a new hot craze and everybody wants to buy and rent and build vacation homes. I don't know, whatever. So people across the board need more money regardless of interest rates. And so what that will do in turn, if the money supply stayed the same, would be to raise those interest rates. So you can shift either curve. The question is, which one do you shift? And the answer is, if they're talking about the Federal Reserve's actions, you shift the supply curve. If they're talking about the public's actions, you shift the demand curve. All right, hopefully that is a nice little refresher on the money market. If not, ask me questions. Okay, thanks.